If you've ever been to the theater, you've witnessed a masterclass in communication. Each character demonstrating their ability to get what they need, or not, from each other, creating harmony or sparking conflict, influencing, irritating, arousing, amusing, all done for the benefit of us, the audience. Complete strangers making us care about the outcome of a make-believe situation we knew nothing about just minutes before. It's magical, really. And it's the perspective today's guest on the DesuckifyWork podcast brings to her communication coaching practice every day. Shana Gold has been helping folks find their voice at work for over 20 years, after spending several years in the world of theater as an actor and director. The lessons she learned play out quite nicely on the corporate stage, whether you're presenting to a 1,000-person room, negotiating your next pay package, or having a weekly one-on-one. Shifting from judgment to empathy and discernment. Regulating the nervous system with breath work and sensory awareness. Bringing our outer and inner worlds into alignment and becoming more in tune with who we're speaking with, creating genuine connection. So, next time you go see a show, enjoy the performance and consider taking a few mental notes as well. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, rate, review, or subscribe to the podcast. Let the desuckifying begin. Here's Shana. Okay, Shana Gold, welcome to the DesuckifyWork podcast.
Oh, pleasure to be here.
Yeah, pleasure to have you here. I'm excited to dig into stuff. I know you deal a lot with communications and presenting and all that stuff, but I'd love you to just give us a quick, background. What do you do for work and how'd you come to be doing it?
Okay. Well, the way I came to communication coaching was by way of the theater. I was an actor and a director for a long time. And in acting and directing, there's, at its core is, what do you need as a character? What does the other character need? And how does that either create conflict or does it create harmony? And then it's also, how does the story land on the audience and does it move them in the way you want it to? How does it impact the audience? So all of those things are so key in business communication. Yeah. So I had a mentor who brought me in to work with the executives at his company. And immediately I caught the bug. This was way back in the 90s. I started working at Dell. Okay. And helping them with their presentations. And over the course of the years, I've also gotten very engaged with some other approaches like emotional intelligence and positive intelligence and mindfulness that sort of merge with the presentation coaching to bring all those same principles to interpersonal communication. Okay. So it's really about helping leaders and their teams level up their influence, their impact and engagement through effective, compelling communication so that you can have the impact you want to be having and get the results you want.
I'm a huge fan of what you're doing because I just feel like communication is often at the heart of so many of the challenges we face. I think we assume we should be good at it. We're people, we talk all the time, and we just sort of make this assumption that you throw a bunch of people from various backgrounds with various wants and needs into a room, and we think, oh, I should just be able to figure that out. And I think the reality, and probably part of what's behind the reason I'm trying to desuckify work is because it really sucks when we don't kind of get it right. And then we end up sort of making judgments about people as opposed to sort of just recognizing that there may be a communication problem. So what do you run into as some of like the biggest challenges that people are bringing you in to work with?
Well, I just want to first say how beautifully you articulated the fact that judgment is really at the root of most problems in communication. Yeah. We're usually either or both judging ourselves or the person we're dealing with, or maybe it's the two of us against them, or us against the boss, or us against our team. There's judgment in all these directions of you're not doing it right. I'm not doing it right. I'm bad. You're bad. They're bad. This is bad. And once we get hooked by that judgment, it usually colors everything. And that's where communication usually gets distorted.
Yeah.
Because I'm not able to actually be grounded and kind to myself under those circumstances. And if I'm in shame or blame toward myself, I'm not really going to be receptive or at my best. And then I turn it on other people and I'm shaming and blaming them. They're not going to be at their best. And if I'm in resistance to what is, then I'm not really able to address problems with elegant solutions because I'm in victim mode. Shouldn't be this way.
Yeah.
Right. And that's how it's very human. This is a survival response to things. And so when you said judge, I was like, ooh, that's some good instincts right there. So really, it's the judge in all of us who's both trying to help us survive and we can be grateful for, but also that we can notice isn't always the appropriate response. To have a survival response like fight, flight, freeze makes good sense if we're being chased. Yeah. Right. Or if there's, if we're literally being attacked, then great. So glad we have those. And it allowed us to survive all these many years. Yeah. However, the majority of our problems don't require that response. They require us to be grounded, clear-headed, focused, empathetic towards ourselves and empathetic towards others, and then with fierce boundaries. Yeah. A lot of people think that empathy and fierce boundaries are in opposition, but really they are ideally married to each other.
How does that work?
So when people come in and they're in judgment, that's when we need to figure out how to get them to really be kind to themselves and also have very high standards for themselves. I think a lot of people think that if they're kind to themselves, then they won't do what they need to do. Right. And the same thing, if they're kind and, empathetic towards the people who report to them or the people who are doing something wrong, then they won't do what they need to do. But in fact, what happens is if we are hard on ourselves and we are hard on others or they are hard on us, that's not motivating. It's demotivating. It just makes us more tense, more resistant, more rebellious, or it makes us so eager to please that we're not pleasing at all. Kind of, turns into desperation. Yeah. So those are what I find. There's usually some version of so eager to please that it's desperate and overkill, or it's so defensive that it creates a lot of this. Those are the two extremes that I encounter when I'm brought into an organization. Yeah. And so, we really look at when it comes to emotional intelligence, we say we start with self-awareness of our own emotional behavior and how we're feeling so that we can get grounded in that. Yeah. And then social awareness, being able to identify and connect with how other people are doing and see things from their point of view. And then understand the situation so that we can get clear on strategies and solutions.
The social awareness is interesting. I think, again, maybe we tend to think we're a little better at this than we often are. And I think it's maybe become even more challenging as we spend more time looking through screens at people. I mean, maybe that's dialed back a tiny bit as some people have kind of returned to work, but that's still a big part of work now is doing this thing. And you don't quite get the same perception of body language. Even the visual cues can be just a little tougher, the face and all that stuff. What are some important things for us to look at when we're trying to notice folks around us and trying to bring that empathy to how they're feeling and how they're showing up?
Do you mean in person or over?
I suppose both. If you're open to sharing both.
Of course. Some of the most important things about how we connect is the energy we bring. And, there's something we call either saboteur contagion or sage contagion. And saboteur contagion is the judgment.
Yeah.
And so if I walk into a room where there's a lot of judgment and a lot of like jangly nerves,
Mm-hmm.
and I allow that to take me over and I feed that, then it
Mm-hmm.
just gets worse and worse, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a room that's really positive and I allow that to feed me, then can come up with something harmonious.
Mm-hmm.
The trick is, can I walk into a saboteur ridden room and bring sage?
Yeah.
Meaning grounded, empathetic, clear,
Mm-hmm.
fierce,
Mm-hmm.
solutions-based thinking
Yeah. Mm.
and engagement. If I can bring that energy into the room,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to sound a little crazy, but you can actually transform the room, especially if you're a leader in that room.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But even if you're not, I just worked with a wonderful client who, she had a CEO who was, to use an overused word, toxic,
Mm-hmm.
and to use a less overused word, saboteur ridden.
Yeah.
And he used a lot of shame and, yelled at everybody all the time. And she felt that she didn't have there was nothing she could do when he was so toxic. And I said, just as an experiment, I'd like you to see what it's like to be in the meetings and don't say anything. Because her tendency was actually to get in there and put up her dukes.
Yeah.
And that didn't go anywhere good because this guy was so combative.
Mm-hmm.
And he did just, made him want to crush her.
Yeah.
So, but I didn't also want her to go into fear and intimidation. So I said, why don't we just try an experiment? Just go in and do all the things that we do to get ourselves grounded and our nervous system regulated.
Yeah.
And just bring that energy and just see what it would be like to try to co-regulate, which just means like I'm sending you that good energy that I have. I'm not going to say anything, just engaging with that. And then that shows up in my presence. And presence is a huge part of what I do. And presence means that my inside and my outsides are aligned. So if I can do that, if I can come into presence and have my inside and my outside match in a positive way,
Yeah.
people feel that and they respond to it, and they often will rise to it. Not always.
Yeah.
Most of the time they will.
Yeah.
And if I can manage that and then have my words align with that, then it's like a superpower. And that is, so presence, bringing presence is one of the most impactful things we can do. And then adding in eye contact and openness instead of closed is always great. And then breathing feels good to people.
Yeah.
People give me the feedback a lot that they find me relaxing.
Yeah. I can
Which
see
is interesting.
that. Yeah.
The opposite of that is what most of us are doing, which is our insides and our outsides don't match. And in my line of work, we call that incongruent. So if our insides and our outsides match, then we're congruent.
Yeah.
If our insides and our outsides don't match, we're incongruent. And when that happens, some of the worst saboteur responses can manifest.
Okay.
And the example I give is when I was a theater director and I would get very stressed and I'd be very frustrated with people.
Yeah.
But I would try to suppress that and be nice. And they could feel something was off. They didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
But they could feel it, and it rarely led to a good outcome. And I would go complain, and I would be like, I was so nice. I was so kind. I didn't yell at them. I said I understood. And what I realize now is that I wasn't congruent. And so no matter how great my words were, it was not going to be super effective. So your words matter. Your energy matters just as much, if not more.
Yeah, which I imagine, in the moment that can be a little tricky, right? You talk about your experience as a director and you're feeling agitated and riled up and you're wanting to deal with the situation in a calm way. What what needs to happen there? How do we get our energy right? Is it as simple as kind of that taking a breath and doing that, or is there more to
I
it to
mean,
bring it in alignment?
breath is really key.
Yeah.
If you're in the middle of a really hard situation, you can feel that you are getting triggered,
Mm-hmm.
or flooded is another way, or hijacked. There's all sorts of
Yeah.
terms. Um, it can be challenging under those circumstances. And we just have to be understanding that, it's going to be a heavy lift to suddenly be able to
Mm-hmm.
let that go. It takes
Yeah.
practice. It takes building up those muscles. So what I do with my clients is we work on building up our muscles so that when that time comes, we're
Mm-hmm.
more able to hold that heavy lift.
Mm.
Asking ourselves to go from 0 to 500-pound weight is not necessarily going to go like that.
Yeah.
We might drop it the first time we try it.
Yeah.
But building up our resilience, building up our endurance for those challenges in the less challenging situations.
Mm-hmm.
So every day I take a breath. Every day I think about what today might get me flooded or triggered.
Mm-hmm.
And how would I like to respond instead of
Yeah.
react?
Mm-hmm.
Having those kind of strategic thoughts before you go into the meeting can be enormously helpful, because really people have patterns. So you
Yeah.
can kind of predict,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And what happens when we predict usually is we assume and we blame in advance. And that doesn't help.
Yeah.
But if we can predict, oh, this person has a tendency to react in this way. They go right into blame and they just start with the accusations.
Mm-hmm.
And then I get defensive.
Mm-hmm.
So instead, I'm going to think about taking a deep breath, engaging with my five senses. I might just, try to touch my clothing and feel the fabric.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you can even just look at somebody's eyes
Mm.
and be like, oh, blue eyes.
Mm. That's interesting.
And then I might think about, how do I want to feel and how do I want them to feel?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And usually what happens is when we're being driven by these saboteur, survival, judgment feelings, is it becomes adversarial,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
right?
Oh,
But if
yeah.
instead I want actually for us both to be doing well so that we can collaborate.
Mm-hmm.
So when we remember that what we want is to collaborate, that's a very different energy. So sometimes it's just a reminder of that. But like you say, it can be overwhelming in the moment. That's why we build up over time. That's why
Mm-hmm.
having people be in one-on-ones with me, or, having a workshop and then doing it themselves,
Mm-hmm.
whatever works.
Yeah.
But building up that muscle so that when that 500-pound weight comes, you can actually manage it
Mm.
rather than feeling crushed under it.
Yeah.
And I also will often suggest that people practice with like 5-pound weights. So if you're somebody who, when the waiter comes by and they ask you how everything is, you just automatically say, great, even if it's not.
Yeah.
Or if they come over and you get kind of mad that things aren't the way they want, this is a perfect opportunity to get into congruence.
Mm-hmm.
And so recently I was having lunch with a friend, and the waiter came over and said, how was everything? And we both said, great, thanks. And we went back and we were like, actually, it's really kind of bad. Mine's a little burnt. And she said,
Yeah.
mine's really tough. And I was like, okay, here's my opportunity to see if I can regulate myself first. And when they came back, I said, you know what? When you asked earlier, we weren't honest with you because we didn't want to make you feel bad. But in truth, mine's burnt and hers is tough.
Mm.
And they were like, oh, I'm so sorry. And they said, would you like something else? We said, no, it's okay. And they said, oh, how about I comp you dessert? Great. Sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody was shamed or blamed.
Yeah.
And so the two extremes, like I said, are usually I'm just going to be in ruinous empathy and not be honest,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm going to go into attack and defense
Yeah.
and shame, blame, recrimination. So, if somebody brings you cold soup and you say, how dare you bring me cold soup? What kind of crappy place is this?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's the judge. That's the saboteur response.
Mm-hmm.
But if somebody brings you cold soup and you say, hey, the soup is cold, can you please heat it up?
Yeah.
That's not to say they won't get defensive, because they
Right.
might bring all their own stuff. But you know that from your end that you are clean.
Yeah. That's an interesting and I think important note, because sometimes when we think about communication and changing our communication, it may, at least part of our motivation may be, I want to control how the other person reacts, meaning I want to be better at getting what I want, so to speak. And what I'm hearing from you is it may result in that by changing it, but the only thing you really can control is how you're showing up in your presence and getting yourself right. So I think that's like, I can imagine somebody might be like, well, I did all the things and they still got upset. So, well, yeah, you're not a puppeteer, you know. So how do you frame this for people in a way that they can see that this is beneficial, even if it's not like a magic trick that immediately turns everything your way?
Okay. Well, first of all, I just love that you mentioned that you can't control how the other person reacts.
Mm,
And all you can control is yourself and your response.
yeah.
And there's something empowering in that
Mm-hmm.
once you accept it,
Yeah.
because you realize that their reaction is not your responsibility, it's theirs.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can sort of distance yourself in some ways, because a lot of us will internalize and say,
Yeah.
it didn't work, or, I'm bad or they're bad.
Mm-hmm.
And the other piece is what we call the sage perspective, and what a lot of people know as a growth mindset, which is no matter what happens,
Mm-hmm.
I will learn, I'll see an opportunity for learning and growth, and that I might find some way to convert it into a gift. And it might even turn out to be for the best in some way I can't understand right now. And when I ask people, has there ever been a time where the worst thing happened, the thing you didn't want to happen happened, and you learned something and you grew from it, and it
Yeah.
even turned out to be for the best? And everybody has an example.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I will often say, just leave room for that possibility.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to still put all your sage attention, grounded, clear, fierce, laser focus attention on getting the outcome you want.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. You're not trying to have things turn bad.
Yeah.
You're just understanding, taking that extra layer of pressure that doesn't help,
Mm-hmm.
that says, if this doesn't work out, disaster, or I have to be perfect.
Yeah.
And just says, if it doesn't go the way I want, I'm resilient. I will learn and I will grow, and it might even turn out be for the best. I don't know how. I'm not going to try to pretend I know how right now, because that will just create resistance in me.
Yeah.
But just the awareness that it can be very liberating.
Yeah, I can see that. And I know there's certainly been experiences in my life. I think back to, I got fired from a job years ago, and it absolutely turned out to be a good thing for me. What's interesting in that space, and I'm curious how you sort of coach around this, like, it freaking hurt. Like it was not like, even knowing on some level, and I don't know that I knew this at a very deep level, but I think probably on some level I knew, like, I can probably learn from this. There's still the sort of hurt feeling and the weight of that we need to feel. So how do you sort of coach around that, like being open to this sort of idea of it being a gift, potentially being open to the fact that you may not know what that is yet, and also feeling the feelings?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because for many years I was the kind of person who would skip to like toxic positivity. Like, that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
It's for the best. And that's not where we're trying to go here.
Yeah.
We're trying to actually say authentically, I'm going to feel my feelings. I'm going to mourn this loss. I'm going to have all the, multitude of experiences and feelings about this and process those feelings
Yeah.
authentically.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to shift. Just like we talk about, would it be a good thing if you couldn't feel pain? None of us like pain, right?
Yeah.
But do you think it would be a good thing if you couldn't feel pain?
I'm pretty sure it wouldn't be, even though I like
Yeah.
the idea sometimes.
Yeah. So, because if you could, and there are people who actually have these syndromes,
Yeah.
and if there's a hot stove, they could put their hand on it and not feel that it's hot and just leave their hand there and
Yeah.
not get burnt.
Mm-hmm.
So we can think about our stressors and triggers as the way we think about our hand on a hot stove. We want to feel it
Yeah.
just long enough to address it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I have a burn, I'm not going to pretend it's there and it's not there,
Right.
right? I'm going to treat it. I'm going to heal it. But nor am I going to leave it on the hot stove, which is what most of us do. We actually stoke our dissatisfaction.
Why do we do that?
And it's a survival response.
Yeah. Okay.
Especially those of us who have people-pleasing tendencies. We kind of feel like we need our anger so that we don't get exploited.
Okay.
And ideally, what we want to do is say, I'm not being treated the way I want to be treated. So I'm going to set a boundary. I'm going to manage that. You don't actually have to be in shame, blame, and recrimination to do that.
Yeah.
But the patterns tell us that we do.
Yeah. So a quick question on that, because I think this is an area where a lot of us struggle. The distinction between setting, as you've even said, like being fierce about setting the boundaries. Like I love that language, but I can also imagine in the application, myself or others might struggle to kind of know where the line is between fiercely protecting my boundaries and moving into the sort of saboteur mindset and judgment and all that stuff. So how do you distinguish between the two, and are there practices to help us navigate that sort of tough blurring of possibilities?
Yeah. So when we are in saboteur or judge mode, we're actually in a specific part of our brain. Like there's neuroscientific research around this. And one of the ways we shift to a different part of our brain and send different hormones through our bodies is through our breath and through our engagement with our five senses. So if we do that first, and we're not in saboteur mode, that's going to fairly guarantee that you're not going to run that saboteur survival judgment energy at other people. And when we set our boundaries from that place, that's really helpful. And then second, it's about empathizing with ourselves, because empathy is the opposite of judgment.
Yeah.
And I like to use the term discernment.
Okay.
So discernment is, I'm going to actually observe with curiosity and interest what is working and what's not working.
Okay.
And then I'm going to address it. And if what's not working is that somebody is regularly trying to intimidate me into doing something I don't want to do, then I can have empathy for myself. It's hard for me to say no because of my own patterns and wiring and the way I was raised.
Yeah.
And they somewhere along the line learned that that works, and that's why they're doing it.
Yeah.
They're not evil.
Right.
They're playing out a pattern that doesn't work for me. And it probably isn't all that great for them either.
Yeah.
Because it probably breeds a lot of resentment. So that's discernment and empathy, rather than they're a jerk and I have to fight for my rights.
Yeah.
Right? So that helps with that discernment. And then if I come in and I sit and I know, even if I don't say the words, I know that that person had a really good reason for developing that pattern, and that it's also not okay with me. Then I can set boundaries from that place of empathy for myself and for them. And then, of course, I have lots of things I teach in workshops that are about the words we use around setting boundaries. Like, when you do this, this is how it feels for me, or this is the reaction that I have. And I'm going to make a request. And if somebody won't take your request, that's a good sign, right? That's good information, right?
Okay.
So
What do I
now
do
I
with
know
that?
where I stand, right?
Yeah.
If I make a request from a place of sage
Mm-hmm.
rather than, you know, demand,
Yeah.
um, then I know I have information. I have to
Mm.
decide what I want to do with that information.
Yeah.
And
I-
every now and then there's nothing we can do. We
Yeah.
might actually have to just use our sage and we can only control how we react and make
Mm-hmm.
decisions from that place.
Yeah.
But sometimes I have actually helped people get out of toxic workplaces. They
Mm.
thought they were stuck.
Mm.
They thought they had no choice.
Yeah.
And over a 3-month period, we got them out of there and into a much better workplace.
Mm.
Other people thought they had to get out
Yeah.
and learned actually that they could have an impact to make it a better place to be and
Mm.
actually find a way to be happy there. And
Yeah.
both are possible.
Mm.
And then sometimes you're just, when it's like a relative, when it's family, those are the ones that really set us on our
Yeah.
guru path. Because there's, sometimes we
Lots
just,
of good learning there. Yeah.
yeah, we're just, what can I learn? How can I learn and grow
Yeah.
from this?
Mm. Yeah. I mean, I think what I'm appreciating about what you're saying is that it leaves room for a lot of agency, where I think, as you've alluded to and spoken to earlier, we often think that we almost have to give up our agency to be nice or calmer, as opposed to no, like you can both make requests, from a place, as you mentioned, of sage and discernment. And again, you don't have control over the outcome, but that's okay because then you can make a decision based on that information. I'm okay managing this, or I'm not okay managing it. I'm going to leave this company, leave this team, whatever, whatever, whatever. And then I think on the flip side, I think there's something about the ability to just have regulation over our own reactions that's really empowering. I hear the term regulating your nervous system a lot. And it almost sounds like voodoo to me at times because I'm like, what do you mean? Like my nerves just go and they're firing and I'm
Right,
mad or I'm sad or I'm glad or whatever,
right.
or I'm in blame and shame or any of those things, right? And it feels so without choice
Yeah.
that what I'm hearing you,
And it's scary and disempowering,
oh yeah, yeah,
right? When we feel
overwhelming,
flooded, when we feel
yeah,
hijacked, it's not fun
yeah,
for the most part. And so knowing that you're gonna, if let's say you would like to going forward, every day for 5 minutes in the morning after you turn off your alarm, you're going to focus on your breath. And you're going to tense and release from your head to your toes and back up again.
mm-hmm,
And you're going to pay attention to 3 red things you can see and 3 circles. Listen for sounds, go through your 5 senses. That's actually something that
mm,
people use when they're having a panic attack. So we know it works.
mm,
It grounds
wow.
you.
I like that could have come in handy a few times in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're going to just create this habit
Mm-hmm.
that you have this routine memorized so that you
Mm-hmm.
don't have to really think about it consciously.
Yeah.
And you're going to set up that plan that when you feel flooded, triggered, dysregulated,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to, for me, one of the best things is actually try it right now. Just try counting 3 red things in your room.
Mm. 2, 3.
So you might notice you can't really do anything else when
No,
you're doing
no,
that, right?
it's all
So it just gives
focused.
your nervous system a break from the stressful thoughts that are
Mm-hmm.
triggering it.
Yeah.
Really, the hormones of stress and anxiety or anger, any negative emotion,
Mm-hmm.
only run for 90 seconds.
Mm. Hmm.
But then we re-trigger them with our thoughts.
Why do we do that? What's going on
It's
there?
a survival response.
Okay.
It's about danger.
Mm.
When we feel like we're in danger, our ancient lizard brain thinks the
Mm-hmm.
best thing to do is keep setting the alarm bells.
Yeah. Okay.
Doesn't understand that we're actually, most of the time, safe. We're not in a life or death situation the majority of the time.
Yeah.
When we are, we can be so grateful that we have that lizard brain in us.
Yeah.
The rest of the time, it's not so helpful.
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
can be grateful to it. We can say thank you, but
Right.
no thank you right now.
Yeah.
Don't need you.
I like that perspective, right? It's kind of like, yeah, you're good, but I don't think I need you right now. And as I think about it, one of the things I probably hear from, a lot of my own clients as a coach, like there's this almost bewilderment about the fact that this lizard brain is so active all the time doing office work. And like whatever it is, you work for a financial company, an advertising agency, whatever it is, like there is just, it can feel like that thing is turned on 90+% of the time. And like when they're talking with me and they have a moment for that to be shut out, it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like, obviously, I'm fine. Obviously, this isn't going to hurt me in any significant way. But yet it's so quick to activate. I mean, is the way through simply lots of practice at kind of these centering kind of mechanisms and processes that you've talked
Yeah.
about? Is there
Yeah,
more there?
it's a symbiotic relationship. Like I just said, there's the nervous system survival response, and then there's the thinking,
Yeah.
right? And those two, the way they hook. So when we can actually get clear and practice grounding ourselves and regulating our nervous system, and then also work on our mindset
Yeah.
together, it's a superpower. But yes, it takes daily practice. I don't know where this piece of data comes from, but I believe what they say is that most learning is 20% insight and 80% practice.
That's interesting, right? Because I think we often act as if it's almost flipped.
That's right.
We
And then we can't
read,
understand why when we had this amazing insight, we had this
Yeah.
amazing aha, and then we go right back to the way we always did it. Well,
Yeah.
I've been doing it for umpteen years that way. I'm completely habituated.
Yeah.
Of course, it's going to take a little longer for me. I have to regularly rewire,
Yeah.
right, in order to have a new pattern. And in addition, I need to change the way I think about it. Together, that's how we make change.
Yeah. Changing our thinking is a tricky one too sometimes, right? Because that can feel very automatic, right? It's like you said, these are these patterns that have been wired probably since we were 5 years old or something.
Yeah.
And they don't always feel like our choice.
No.
And you hear this kind of phrase like change your thoughts, change your life, those kinds of things. And at first it sounds nice. And then you kind of go, yeah, but how do I do that? So you've talked a bit about the sort of resetting yourself and getting yourself in the right space. I mean, is there an actual process for sort of noticing thoughts as they arise and then actively changing them? And how do we do that?
Yes. Yes, and I hesitate to ask people to try to change their thoughts in that moment because what can happen is suppression. And I really want to make a distinction between suppression and regulation. And I wish there were a better word than regulation because regulation can feel like a forcing.
Yeah.
And really, like, it would be better if it was just about transforming. It's about shifting.
Okay.
Right? So if I shift my nervous system, my somatic response, that'll help. And then instead of saying like, I need to change this, which can lead to suppression, I can just examine it with discernment.
Okay.
Is that true? There's a wonderful book called Loving What Is by Byron Katie, and she has this inquiry. And I use it with my clients quite a bit. And the inquiry is, take a stressful thought. Can you give me an example of a stressful thought you might have?
Well, this will lead into my next question, but I've got to give a big presentation and I feel like I'm going to fail.
Okay. I'm going to fail. Could be the stressful thought. The question is that true?
I mean, in the moment, it feels true, but obviously we can't know.
I don't know. That's a great answer.
Yeah.
If you had said yes, the second question would be, can you absolutely know it's true?
Mm.
In that case, you might say no.
Yeah.
The third question is, how do I feel when I think that thought? How do you feel when you think I'm going to fail?
God. Just like all of my nerves have gathered in my stomach and are forming like a bowling ball of stress.
A bowling ball of stress.
Yeah.
That was very vivid. Well said. And then the next question is, how do you feel without the thought? Can you just imagine what it would be like if that bowling ball of stress just disintegrated?
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I can think of is that it just feels normal. Like I'm just me.
Light.
Yeah. Light. Yeah.
And that a lot of times people get tripped up by that question because they can't fathom it. And that's where I use some of my techniques of visualizations and somatic work.
Yeah.
But some people can just be like, feels like relief, feels sweet.
Yeah.
Like sweet relief is something I hear a lot.
Yeah.
And then the final question is, can you turn it around? So if I don't do a great job on this presentation, what does it mean?
So meaning trying to come up with a different response.
Yeah, what could be a different truth if that's not true?
Yeah. That gets tricky for me. I think I want to go to the place of like, well, I'll learn something, you know. But it's like I believe that at about an 80% right now when I think.
That's okay. You don't need to believe it right away. That's asking a lot of yourself.
Yeah.
You're just coming up with a new truth to look at that can sit alongside the old one.
Yeah.
And then you can use discernment and say, which one serves me better?
Yeah.
Is this helping me, this ball of stress,
Yeah.
fear, and anxiety? Is that useful? If it is, go for it. I mean,
Right.
that's you. You know, do you.
Yeah.
But in most cases, it's not, right? And so I can decide, I want to choose this truth. This serves me. I feel better without this thought. I feel better with this thought.
Yeah.
I'm going to choose this one. So if the thought, if I don't do well in this presentation, I'm going to learn and grow.
Yeah.
And then we can add a new one as well. Chances are I'm going to do pretty well.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And if I don't, I'm going to learn, I'm going to grow, I'm going to find a gift.
Yeah, that's pretty cool because I could feel that distinction even as you were saying, even as you said, if I don't do well, I'm going to learn and grow. It's like I could feel the bowling ball kind of dissipating.
Yeah.
Just
I'm not
with
saying it'll be fun.
Right.
Nobody likes to fail.
Yeah.
And yet, if you ask any entrepreneur, if you ask any major business person, they will have had major failures. And the difference is, did they learn and grow from them or did they not?
Yeah.
And the ones who learn and grow from those U-turns, those are the most successful people.
So I want to just follow up on all this with just kind of the fundamental question sometimes, which is why are we, almost everyone to some degree has this big fear of public speaking? What do we think is going on there? And what do we need to change beyond what you've just talked about there? Is there any kind of reframing or mindset shift that needs to happen to just think about that big idea, public speaking?
Right.
Differently?
Yes. It's a public speaking. You're asking why is it such a big fear?
Yeah.
I think it's the third after death and spiders or snakes or something like that, which is so funny because those are truly deadly and the other one's just embarrassing.
Yeah.
And it's because that lizard brain that we talked about has a survival response to failure and rejection, which means it feels like we're going to die. Because way back in our cave person days, if we were rejected or we failed, we would be cast out and we would die.
Yeah.
So there's a good reason that our lizard brain thinks that we're going to die.
Yeah.
We have to remind our lizard brain we're not going to die. That we're actually just going to feel some feelings that aren't pleasant, but that we will survive them.
Yeah.
Number one. So that's just a reminder.
Mm-hmm.
And just noticing, sometimes just noticing it. I actually have something that a lot of people with neurodiversity have, which is called rejection sensitive dysphoria, RSD.
Yeah.
And that means that if I don't get positive feedback when I do something, I immediately go into a shame spiral. And even with all I know, it still happens. And when that happens now, because of all these practices that I have, I can just go RSD and I just take all the wind out of its sails. It just doesn't pull me under.
Yeah.
And all we can ask if we have these patterns is to not get sunk by them, but to actually be resilient and keep shortening the amount of time it takes us to notice.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. Because I think I've noticed my own noticing, with certain things speeds up if I'm practicing, but other things, it's like, it can be days, months, or there are things that took years to notice where you're kind of like, you wake up one day and you're like, oh. And I like the idea that you can start to build habits and practices that can just create sort of a fast forward on the noticing scale for us. So that
and the more you practice, the more internalized they are.
Yeah.
So you talked about how hard it is in that moment.
Yeah.
But if you've practiced and you've started creating new neural pathways, it'll occur to you in a different way than if you hadn't practiced. If you only have the insight, then it may not help.
Yeah.
It'll just help in retrospect. You can still learn and grow from it, which is great. In the moment requires really building up those muscles. Just like going to the gym and doing your reps is what you have to do in order to, lift up that card in an emergency. And the other piece you asked about the what techniques is something that I learned recently that I love, which is that anxiety, fear, and nervousness, which a lot of us feel before public speaking, has the exact same physiological symptoms as excitement. So if we reframe what are some feelings you might get before if you were nervous to speak?
Heart beating faster, maybe flushing a little in the face, palms sweaty.
Okay. Now think about a time when you were excited. Can you think of a time?
Yeah.
What were the symptoms?
Probably pretty similar. Yeah. Definitely like the face flushing and the heart racing.
Yeah. When we start to fall in love, butterflies, right? Adrenaline, or waiting to go on the big ride at the amusement park.
Yeah.
Right? There's fear in there.
Yeah.
There's also excitement. So if we can imagine that what we're going to do is like going on an exciting and fun ride instead of something that makes us, go into constriction, that's actually expansive.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I think that one feels like it's another one of these good aha insights that you probably need to practice for it to really stick, right? Knowing
Next
that
time you start to feel nervous, you might need to put up a Post-it note on on your bathroom mirror.
Yeah.
And just, I'm excited.
What
if instead of, because that connection, so we have like a constriction or a flush or a butterfly, and then our thought goes into a negative thought loop. And then our negative thought loop feeds the physical response and it just goes like this.
Okay.
But if I could interrupt that and go, oh, I'm actually excited. What could be great about this situation? What do I get to share? Instead of like, oh, these people are going to judge me and find me wanting or reject me. What if I think about, how do I want to connect with these people? What do I love and want them to understand? Or how can I be of service to these people? Right?
Yeah. It almost makes me want to do some of those things before I'm in the heightened state, meaning why, like getting really clear, why am I doing this? What am I getting from this? What benefits me from going to speak? Because obviously it must do something because I'm doing it. So that you then have access to that. Like, remember, we've got stuff we love about doing this that might be a little trickier to access in the moment, or at least feel like slightly behind the wall. So I wonder if that could be another helpful way to practice that.
That's
Yeah.
a great way to practice is start with the 5-pound weight.
Mm-hmm.
Do it when it's not so intense
Yeah.
and build your way up
Mm-hmm.
and keep doing it every day.
Mm.
If you read Atomic Habits by
Mm-hmm.
James Clear,
Yeah.
he talks about, what kind of person do you want to be? Do you want to be the person who has the ball and is afraid
Yeah.
of putting up their fists? Or do you want to be the person who's excited and enthusiastic and ready to learn and grow?
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, I always love that question. What kind of person or who do you want to be? I think that sets us up so well. Speaking of questions, I've asked you a handful here. I'd love to give you a chance to ask our audience a question. Do you have something we could pose to them?
I always ask my clients the question, who would you be without that fear?
Mm. Yeah.
Or what would you say if you weren't afraid of rejection?
Mm.
What would you do if you weren't afraid of failure?
Mm. I love those questions. Yeah. I mean, they already got my mind racing, and they also all immediately sort of quiet some of the negative voices, because now I've been nudged into a more sage-like thought process. Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
You've been nudged into a sage-like thought process.
Yeah. I like it. And that's, I think, it's a wonderful gift to give somebody, to give them that opportunity to move into that. This is the DesuckifyWork podcast, and I always like to ask people, if you could wave a magic wand and create a more fully desuckified work world, what would that look like for you?
It would be a world where people had that emotional intelligence awareness of how they were feeling, and the awareness that they have the power to shift it, that they had empathy and care for the people they were talking to, and that empathy and care, instead of leading them to not address problems, actually encourage them to address problems or be clear about their needs from a place of empathy and clarity and fierce boundaries, so that we can give and receive feedback in a way that people can hear and use and apply that feedback, and everybody can learn and grow and collaborate and be their most effective and powerful and productive and profitable.
Well, that sounds pretty wonderful.
That sounds good.
I will wave my wand as well to try to doubly make that happen.
Yeah. Well, I'm using my alliterative P's, presence.
Yeah.
That if we all lead with presence, that things tend to go a lot better.
Yeah, no, I can believe that. So I like to have a silly moment before we sign off. And I always invite people to share a sound effect. If you listen to the show, you'll hear some sounds at the beginning and the end. So do you have a desuckified sound effect to add to our library?
Desuckified sound effect. One of the things I like to do when I'm helping people do their reps to ground themselves is to do something that horses do when they're releasing tension, which is this. Can you do it? Not everybody can.
I don't know if I can.
Yes, you can.
There is
Feels good, right?
something releasing
It
about
releases.
it. I don't know what it's doing physiologically, but I do appreciate it. And we will hear that somewhere in the beginning of the show, and hopefully invite others to try that at home when they're feeling a little bit of that, maybe their own little bowling ball forming in their gut, and they want to release a little bit of that.
That sounds good.
So last question, where can people find you and learn more about the awesome work you're doing?
Oh, well, please check out my website, shanagoldcoaching.com. And you're also welcome to email me, which is shana@shanagoldcoaching.com. And that is spelled Shana, which can confuse people. It looks like it should be Shana. But so ShanaGold, Shana@shanagoldcoaching.com. And I'd love to hear from you. And I would like to offer your listeners an opportunity to have a clarity call with me and talk about what might help them be the most sage and effective communicator.
Oh, that's very, very generous of you. And I hope some folks take you up on it, because I can already tell you just from this experience. I mean, you mentioned that people describe you as kind of calming. For sure, you have that way, and I think what's really special about that is you noting that you've got some of your own struggles with some of the stuff you mentioned, the sort of RSD and all that kind of stuff. Like I think there's something really powerful about being showing up a certain way when we know it's not always easy. Something very powerful.
Thank you. We are all in process here.
Yeah.
We are all on the journey. I am by no means perfect, and I just have a lot of great tools and resources that I'd like to share.
Awesome. Well, Shana, thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it. This was awesome.
Thank you for having me. You're a wonderful listener and communicator. So
thank you.
Great modeling.
Oh, I love it. Well, we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the DesuckifyWork podcast. And a huge thanks to Shana for bringing deep wisdom and a calming presence to the show. You can follow Shana on LinkedIn and check out her site at shanagoldcoaching.com. If you enjoyed the conversation and would like to dive deep into some of your own challenges at work, I invite you to schedule a free half-hour discovery session where we can explore new desuckified possibilities for your future. Bye, everyone.